Hi guys! Okay, first off, no, I was not driving with her like this. She is just not having a very good day. But, as you probably noticed from the title, we're here to talk about cold air intakes and intakes in general. So, if you remember my video from last time, we talked about what an engine is, mechanical differences. Intakes is a whole more different story, so let's get into that. If you watch the videos of this car here, this is my 91 Celica that has a quote-unquote cold air intake. A lot of people love to give me comments on this one. I know. It's not a full-on proper cold air intake. Now, first off, I'm not the one that put that on there. So disclosure, I'm not the one that did that. However, it is a cold air intake, and it's not at the same time. Let's get into that. That's fun to do. Okay, so what this car has is a cold air intake. However, it's not taking advantage of cold air when it's idling. When it's driving, there is a sort of like, yeah, I guess you could kind of say like a tunnel effect that's giving it cold air. At the end of the day, it has a filter on it and the piping that's leading to the engine. It's not decreasing the horsepower, it's not increasing it, it's just keeping it basically at stock level. I would argue to say that this car makes less than stock only because of its age and mileage. But other than that, my Kia, you can look at the videos that I made back then, a couple months ago, but I'm not going to unwrap my Kia just to show it off in this. But I have a cold air intake that's away from the engine, and I remember a comment that somebody says, oh, that's not a cold air intake, that's a no air intake. Well, if it didn't have air, the car wouldn't start. I'm not trying to like make an argument here, but it literally would not start without that. Now, it's not taking advantage of ram air, which that's something different and I'm going to get into later in this video. But what a colder intake is, it's an upgrade to take advantage of colder air, because colder air is denser, and the more dense the air is, means the more air molecules you can fit inside the cylinder, meaning the more fuel that you can add, aka more air, more fuel equals more power. That is just how it is. If you had a car that made 100 horsepower without a cold air intake and it didn't take advantage of any cold air, you add a cold air intake to it, just that, no exhaust, I would say you might make like 103, 104. Not a big difference, but you know, every little horsepower counts. We're going to get into that a little bit here later. Slash it. Okay guys, so, like I said, talking about intakes. This is just a rough Google, if you Google what a cold air intake is, this is what you're going to get. As most of you, if not all of you that watch this will actually know, unless somebody that doesn't know cars stumbled across this video and wants to watch it, cold air intake is an aftermarket. It can also be derived from factory. A lot of Porsches that are naturally aspirated, and even a lot of Volkswagens are that are naturally aspirated, do use a cold air intake system directly from K&N. Some of them, not all of them. But that is what a cold air intake is. Going on to the next one. This is talking about ram air, which I'm going to get into a little bit later in the video. But ram air is the principle of using the natural force that you are already creating while driving on the road to force feed that into your engine. Quote unquote, makeshift non-turbo turbo. I'll get into that later, because you don't use a cold air intake on a turbocharged car. I will get into that in another video later on. But this is a great diagram, and I'm going to zoom in here a little bit. Right up here. So, unfortunately, the words you can't really read probably on your end at all. Even from my end, it's very, very pixelated. But these two here show, this is an old-fashioned cowl induction, what they would call. And this is what you would find on a car that's carbureted, because intakes go back, well, cold air intakes, go back all the way up to the 1960s, back when stock cars were still being modified, like within regulations and still being somewhat streetable. But you have cold air that comes in here. Well, this is a bit of a ram air system as well, but this one's actually not considered ram air. But it comes in here. The hood actually had piping to it, and I don't know why my screen did that. Come on here. There we go. There we go. But you would have in here, the air's fed into it. This is your carburetor, and then it's sucking in air. And that actually allows it to get cold air from the outside because it's coming in, and it's not it's not sucking up engine air from the engine bay where it's all hot, but it's actually coming in there. And the reason why we're doing that is because cold air is more dense. So the more dense it is means the more molecules that you can fit inside the cylinder, means the more fuel that you can add, means more horsepower, which is great. Now if we come down here, this is a better little bit of a side view of it, but there would be tubing that comes all the way up here. The hood has all this parts up here, and then right there's where your carburetor is. It sucks it in and goes into the intake, and blah, blah, blah. From there, magic happens. Well, science, actually, but for lack of a better term, I'm going to use magic in this tape. This is what it would look like. That is generally aftermarket. Usually the ones that are factory didn't look as pretty. But that one is aftermarket. And as you can tell, this here would be your PCV system usually. Well, an EGR system actually. But over here, that is your actual intake. And it just sucks in air, goes in, up, blows up. That's another angle of one. I don't know what this one is actually fed into, but I think this one is nitrous. I could be wrong, but I believe that's nitrous that's in there. But that I'm not going to get into unless anybody requests it. Now this one here is a ram air style, which has a cowl induction. The cowl induction, there's different styles of it, but as you're driving, just like a truck bed, the air naturally wants to come down. The hood right here would be actually raised up, and this part here would be open. So what happens usually is, while you're driving, air comes in, and it creates a natural pressure, and it just gets scooped in there. I don't know how actually good that ram air is. I don't know too much about the old classic American muscle in that way. I know a lot more about like velocity stacks and stuff like that. But obviously a lot of people used it. It's still used today in some applications. So I would say it probably works to some degree, or else they wouldn't do it. Now we're going to get into ram airs. Now, this is kind of going back to a video I made a long time ago when somebody was saying about my car having not cold air intake. Now, yes, my car technically does not take advantage of its cold air intake that it has because it's sucking in, well, hot air from the engine bay. But this one is talking about more ram air. So you have some type of tubing that comes in, forces air into the intake, passes it, and then goes into the engine and it force feeds it. This is talking about the normal factory setup. So this is what's in my Subaru, technically, and all my other cars. You have an air box. There's a lot of piping usually. Well, I call it piping, but it's plastic tubing that goes wherever. But sucks in it from any direction, but it's not actually forced, and there's no actual like a vacuum or tornado effect that's going on, other than what the intake itself is sucking. And what that usually causes, this box gets hot, so it's sucking in hot air. Now, a car will run like that, and it'll get good gas mileage like that as well. It's not going to affect anything in that regards. But when you put it on a dyno and you have a cold air intake that's properly working versus one that's not working, you're going to notice a big difference in power. Okay, maybe not a big difference, but if it's 100 horsepower, stock, you put a cold air intake that properly works, I'd say anywhere from 103 to 107 maybe horsepower you'll see, typically. Depends on the engine, depends on the design. There's a lot of factors in that as well, but generally that's what you're seeing. This is actually looks identical to the one that's on my car, and I guarantee you, whoever put it on, I don't even know which owner did it, honestly, originally, because that car had so many owners. But, needless to say, whoever did it probably bought this exact same model. This is a general, run-of-the-mill, universal. You can go to AutoZone and pick it up right now. Hashtag not sponsored by AutoZone, by the way, guys. But this does work. If I cut a hole in my hood and raise my intake, and mounted it where it would actually be above the hood level, so when I'm driving it would actually be a ram air as well, this would work perfect. And in some applications, this would be fine. Depending on where my intake came out and I had a heat shroud, it would still be then a cold air intake. The Celica, that's a video for another day, and I will make a special video on that purposely just for the Celica in conclusion to this. But the Celica is designed very uniquely. And it's not a bad thing, it's designed very uniquely where it makes it very difficult to put a cold air intake in it if you're going to keep components that are already on the car, i.e. the battery and stuff like that. But we'll get into that later. Here's another style of cold air intake. When I took the screenshot of this video, of this image, I believe this one is for a Camaro or a Mustang, one of the two. I can't remember. But you have a mounting bracket here. This is where you would actually put like your, I think intake temperature sensor, if I'm not mistaken. And then you have your connecting, and then your cold air intake, obviously, well, the filter. Now here's a Camaro. So you can see that the throttle body is right there, and it goes to this. Now you see that little plastic box that's around it? Unlike the one that is on my Subaru, the factory box, this is actually a proper one because it's actually using a heat shield. The plastic boxes that are on my car, don't know what that is, but that are on my car, my Subaru, doesn't remove heat, which is a problem. But this one would actually remove heat because it has heat shield on it, which is I don't know how to explain it very well, so I'm going to do a very poor job of explaining it. But similar to whenever you aluminum wrap food, it keeps the heat in. It's similar to that. This is just designed to keep heat out of this area, but in over here. And, oh my goodness. See, my wife uses a different thing on my phone. I'm using my phone to do this. 1 minute here, guys. But, needless to say, yes, this area here of the intake might be hot, but whenever air is running through it and the engine's sucking, it's not, the air is running through it, and it's not staying there long enough to heat up again. So, that's why this area is so important to keep away from heat, and it normally would go down over here as well, because all the heat will be, come on, go back out, in this general area. Now, moving onwards, this is a Toyota. You can actually see this is a 2JZ for people that know. Now this one actually, technically that's not a 2JZ. Oh my goodness. I messed up, guys. Sorry. There we go. But, however, while this is not an actual 2JZ, because it doesn't have turbos on this model in particular, I believe this would be the 7MGE if I'm not mistaken, actually, I think. I could be wrong. No, 7MGEs for the 3rd Gen Supra. I don't know the 4th Gen Supra super well, guys. Or should I say super well? Haha, but needless to say, this is a cold air intake. You can see that it is away from the engine. There is no heat shielding, so the amount of pressure of how much this is actually working, I don't know. But I will tell you this, he does have his headlight off, so I'm guessing he runs it without the headlight. So it's actually probably getting some type of effect of a similar of ram air. Wouldn't say a very good addition to it, but a little bit. Now here's another ram air system that's really well diagrammed out. You can see on, and I think they actually do this from the factory on the Corvette C6. As the car is pushing or driving on the road, air is pushing and being forced up here, goes right up to the tube, and then right here is where it would have a tube connecting to the throttle body. And that's all forcing it into the engine, making more power, which is one reason why the C6 Corvette is actually a very well-known car in its field. This is from a Dodge Viper. Now, the Viper does take advantage of ram air naturally, but this is an image of it with aftermarket cold air intakes. Now, this is dual throttle body, so this is a little bit different than what other cars have. Not all cars have dual throttle bodies, and most cars don't. But when this hood's closed, it's actually taking advantage of ram air as well. Plus, it has a cold air intakes, and it's actually away from the engine as well. So even if it's idling, it's still getting cold air. Not that you really need cold air when it's idling, but still nice to know. Great for a dyno. And that's the last image that I have actually on there. But at the end of the day, guys, like I was saying, cold air intake is just to modify the intake system. It's a very cheap modification. It works on, I would say, 95, if not 98% of every car that's being sold out there today, other than electric cars, obviously. But if your car doesn't have a turbocharger on it or a supercharger, cold air intakes work. Actually, superchargers, you can still use a cold air intake. But turbocharging doesn't really work superly well, and that's just because turbos force feed the motor, so it's not needed. But there you go, guys. Hope you enjoyed. You guys have a good day.